always some great. Just to let you know, if you didn't just hear that update, we'll be recording the webinar. So just to let you know that that's happening, but it'll be available afterwards for anybody who couldn't make it on the day. I'm just going to give everybody just a minute more before I do the brief introductions, and then we crack on with the programme. Oh, hi Ian, nice to see you. Hi Mark, hi everybody. Nice to see people trickling in, thanks. Okay, it's hit 2 o'clock. Let's get started. So thank you so much everybody for joining us today. My name is not Ren Piercy. We were supposed to be being hosted by Ren, but unfortunately she has been struck down with a horrible cold, so I am taking her place. And I'm Ruth Westcott, and I actually work for Sustain, but a lot of the work that I do crosses over with Sustainable Food Places. And I have been working on procurement now for longer than I would care to own up to. And I have to say that I'm delighted to have to step in here, because for me, I think procurement is about as exciting a time as it's ever been, as long as I can remember, both in the great stuff that's been happening at a local level, but also finally, it feels like at a national level, government are starting to listen to what needs to be done to show greater leadership nationally. So let's crack on with the agenda. We're all probably woefully familiar with these Zoom meetings by now, but this is a webinar, not a meeting, which means that you're naturally on mute. So there's no need to worry about being muted, but I would therefore encourage you to be active in the chat, share ideas, share comments, and then if you have questions, please put those in the questions section for the Q&A, and that will allow us to help us to curate the questions, which will be coming after Karen's presentation and also at the end. We've got a great programme today. First of all, we have Leon Ballin, Programme Manager for Sustainable Food Places, to set the scene. We've got Karen Longdon, who is the Development Lead for Food for Life Served Here and the Green Kitchen Standard. Then we've got a chance for some Q&A. Then I will be taking the floor to talk about our new, shiny new Food for the Planet campaign, which has procurement at its heart, and something about the national context. And then finally, we'll go to Sonia Woodcock from Foodwise Leeds, who's the chair of the Leeds Food Partnership, to talk about the great work that they're doing, particularly on school meals in Leeds. And then we've got a chance for Q&A. So without further ado, if you're just trickling in, please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, where you're from, and what you've had for lunch. Without further ado, though, I will pass on to Leon, who will give us some opening statements and a bit of context about Sustainable Food Places. Thank you, Leon.
Thanks, Ruth. Hello, everyone. My name is Leon Ballin. I'm the Programme Manager for Sustainable Food Places. And what we do is support food partnerships and food partnership work across the UK. And I want to just give you some context about why we are hosting this webinar today. So today we're talking about institutional procurement. So yes, it's public sector, schools, hospitals, prisons, the armed forces and so on, but also those places that serve meals on a large scale and have control over them. So institutions such as universities and colleges and nurseries and care homes. And I think also large employers that also feed their staff. So we're talking about institutional procurement. SFP members, so our members across the UK are the 70 now across the UK. So food partnerships around the country. They take a whole food system approach, as we ask all our members to do, and procurement is an essential part of that. And we've made it one of our 6 key issues. However, it is one of the most difficult and often the weakest or the most intransient area in our SFP award applications. And it could quite often seen as a bit of a black box by our members in terms of engaging with institutions, but also around the language, the contracts and the processes involved. The reason we think procurement is essential and important, it's really simple, it's just down to scale really. I looked up some figures, Karen can check these if they're correct, but the last ones I looked at, NHS is serving around 141 million inpatient meals a year. the 602 million school lunches, 93 million prison meals, and so on. So small changes can have a very big effect. So a big effect on health, on the economy, on the environment, and the way that food is bought, served, eaten, and what happens to the waste afterwards can have a significant impact. So, for example, if an NHS trust, for example, like where I live in Sheffield, if they took off 20% of their meat off the menu and were able to replace it with a veggie or an organic and UK produced alternative, that can shift the dial for patients' health. And it can also make a huge difference to local producers and manufacturers and have an impact on animal welfare and so on. So it's worth changing procurement to better practice. And just as importantly, I think it also puts the public and institutional house in order. When people ask, what are you doing? Those institutions can say, we're putting literally our money where our mouth is and making a difference. And, you know, many of us might have come across some real situations where that hasn't happened, you know, where you've got an outlet in a hospital serving trans fats next to a heart unit, or you have very, you know, high impact, poor, high ecological impact meat in schools while they're teaching their pupils about climate change. So there can be real dissonance if these things aren't put in order. We, the SFP team, realised with some prodding from our members that what we need to do more on procurement. So we have a position and we can support our members who are pressuring for local change, and we can push ourselves at a national level to support that. With the gold standard, we think, of policy change rather than voluntary or temporary measures in procurement. So this is the first in a series of sessions and resources on procurement from us, SFP, led by Ren, who isn't well today, as you've heard. We're very aware it's a huge area, and we could and maybe will run whole sessions on NHS trust, schools or care homes, or we could get deeper around standards, supply chains and contracts. But for now, this session, we thought it best to try and lay out the landscape of what procurement looks like in England, because we will be supporting our national members, national partners separately on this, to ensure that there is a baseline of knowledge in the network. Some of this might be new to you, others maybe not, but we hope it will be useful to everyone. So now I'd like to introduce Karen Longdon from Food for Life Served Here. Her experience in this sector, I think, is, I was going to say unparalleled, Karen, but it's very high. She knows the detail and the big picture, so you can talk to her about standards and contracts, but she'll happily analyse the ingredients in a catering size soup product if asked to do so. So over to you, Karen.
Thank you, Leon. I'll just bear with me while I just share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that now.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Karen.
I'll just get to, I won't be a second, sorry, I just can't see. Okay, hopefully that's worked now. Yeah. Hi there, thanks Leon for that introduction. Yeah, I'm Karen Longdon. I work for the Soil Association's Food for Life team, specifically on our 2 sustainable catering certifications. And yeah, I've worked for the Soil Association now for over 17 years, but I'm a chef by trade. That's what I did. So came back to working in food in a slightly different way. Yeah, and we have 2 certifications, and what I want to do today is, for anybody that doesn't know what they are, is give an overview of what they actually do, a little bit of information about a report that we've just published, and how Food for Life Served Here and Green Kitchen Standard fit into what's happening in the policy world at the moment. But I really want to concentrate on the support that we can offer in the regions for sustainable food places. And any questions that you've got as well, I'm happy to answer any questions. So yeah, so we have Food for Life Served Here, which is in its 12th year now, and concentrates on looking at the ingredients that are served on the plate and how that's promoted to customers. And we've also got Green Kitchen Standard, which is just coming into its 5th year now, which looks at practices in the kitchen specifically around reducing water, energy and waste. And fit together, they sort of, we did them both. We got asked to do Green Kitchen Standard. When you put that with Food for Life Served Here, it meets the requirements of DEFRA's balance scorecard. So that's why we have 2 certifications. I'm going to concentrate on Food for Life Served Here for a little bit and give you an overview of what actually is. So it's split into 3 different levels. We've got bronze, silver and gold. It's an audited award, so anyone that applies for it undergoes an annual audit to show how they meet the standards. The bronze standards are very much fixed standards and everybody meets them in the same way. What we tried to do was look at sort of a baseline so that we know everybody meets that baseline, looking at ingredients such as all meat is from the UK and meets UK welfare standards, looking at the fish that's served, any undesirable additives or trans fats removed, higher welfare eggs, then looking at practice. So we're looking at food that's cooked from scratch, either on site or in the local area. Really looking at how settings develop their staff and ensuring that they've got training to allow staff to be able to do what we ask them around cooking food from scratch. We look at the nutritional standards for the sectors. So in terms of public sector, that would be the school food standards, and at the moment, the government buying standards in hospitals, and customers as well. So we talk a lot about marketing and menu choices and being able to market those, and really looking at that food education around why, what seasonal ingredients are being used, and how they're used. So really promoting that. And so that's the bronze level, that's the very baseline standards. When we move to silver and gold, they're not mandatory standards. We provide, it's a flexible framework where caterers can work to their strengths to gain points. And again, it's split into 3 sections. So we've got environmentally friendly and ethical foods. So looking at organic food and higher welfare pork and poultry, food that might be fair trade certified or higher welfare fish. Looking at local produce. So local as in ingredients from your local area, but also from surrounding counties and food that's purchased in the UK. And also looking at how settings enable their customers to make healthier choices. So looking at things like palm oil and reducing palm oil or using sustainable palm oil, cutting down on sugar and salt, how to get more fruit and vegetables into the diet, promoting whole grains and everything like that. So that's the actual certification for Served Here, and that's what we audit on. This year we've just published Food for Life Served Here annual report. There's a link at the bottom of the screen for anybody that wants to have a sort of detailed look at that. But what we're hoping for is that we'll be producing this report on an annual basis, so we'll be able to show and measure change that happens and annually, which will enable us. We get asked lots of questions from policy and government about how we perform. So we wanted to show the impact of the Food for Life Served Here as a whole across the UK. So you can see there that there's over 2 million meals served in over 7,000 sites, and that's on a daily basis. That's actually gone up since last year, which we're really pleased about. 25% of those meet silver and gold standards, and we've found that over the last year, the percentage that meets silver and gold has actually dropped by around half, which is not really surprising given the feedback that we're getting from a lot of our licensees at the moment around supply chain issues, and just actually having recovering from, you know, coming back from the COVID pandemic, building menus up again. And the feedback that we're getting is that they will start again to try and achieve silver and gold, but we're building up again after the COVID pandemic. Huge majority of the meals that are served in Food for Life Served Here are served in public sector settings, such as schools, hospitals, early years settings and universities. And for the first time, we can show the overall spend on things like organic ingredients and food produced in the UK. There's more data in the report, so if anybody's interested, please do take a look at it. And over the last sort of 12 to 18 months, we've been referenced as best practice in the National Food Strategy and the 2020 Hospital Food Review, which has actually seen an increased interest from hospital sites, which is great for us. Yeah. So that's our annual report. In terms of United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, having Food for Life Served Here and Green Kitchen Standard shows that a caterer can perform highly against those. And we've done some mapping, thanks to our colleagues in Scotland, on how each standard at bronze, silver and gold fits into the Sustainable Development Goals. So I just thought it was useful to share that. And again, there's a link on the slide if anybody wants more detail around the Sustainable Development Goals and the work that we do. But I think what I wanted to do really was outline the support that we can offer, because Food for Life Served Here is referenced in Sustainable Food Places in terms of the procurement, transforming catering and procurement. And we have been doing quite a lot of work that you might find useful. And I just wanted to let you know that we're here and we're here to support the work that you do. So what we've been doing is mapping in terms of sustainable food places, mapping the sustainable food places and the licensees that hold Food for Life Served Here in those areas and Green Kitchen Standard. We've also been mapping the larger public sector bodies and maybe large workplaces that don't hold the certification. So we've got a really good sort of picture of each sustainable food place as to what's happening in terms of our work. We offer meetings and support for anybody, you know, caterers, but also your teams as well, your coordinators. We're more than happy to sort of talk about Food for Life Served Here or what's happening in the local area. We've got loads of resources and we offer training both online and in person. We've been doing a lot of work around contracts, tendering and procurement, partly because we got asked to do it. Licensees have been worried about the way that our logos are being used in the tendering process. So we've really done some work around how contracts and tendering and procurement work, and we map a lot of the tenders that come up and where it references Food for Life Served Here or different, you know, where it references sustainable food. And we've got a regional team as well. So we've got development managers across the country who have a real sort of knowledge about what's happening in the local area. So I think, yeah, if anybody's interested in any of that, any of the mapping that we've done, the resources, anything, then feel free to give me a shout. Yeah, I think my details will be shared afterwards, but it'd be great to catch up with some of you, you know, to see where we can support. So yeah, I think that's it from me, unless there's any questions.
Thanks so much, Karen. That was such a brilliant introduction. And also just outlining the standards like that really helps to get your head around kind of what it means to serve climate and nature and healthy food and what a good kind of procurement policy looks like. So it's a great way to set the context like that. Thank you. So keep the questions coming in. I had one, Karen, if you don't mind me using my chair's privilege to start off.
Yeah,
And that was, if you were a food partnership or a council even, and you're sort of you feel like you're taking your first steps on procurement, what would you recommend would be the first thing that people should do? And what challenges do you often think people come across first? So, you know, who would you speak to, and what do you normally find is comes back as being a challenge to starting to improve procurement?
What I would say is it depends on what model of catering you've got. I think the biggest challenge is the expectation, especially through tendering and procurement, is the expectation that you know, we get settings and councils that know what they want from their procurement, but haven't actually asked for it. So if they've got external caterers or even sort of internal caterers, it's that understanding between the two of what's expected. We always say, if you don't ask, you're not going to get. If you don't specify in a contract with a caterer what you want out of that contract, then you won't get it. And I think we've got real issues at the minute with especially in school settings, with a lot of schools don't really have the skills to ask for what they want out of their catering contract, and we've seen some horror stories of you know, schools thinking they're getting one thing, and then when the contract starts, something completely different, but they haven't sort of had the experience to really scrutinize that. So my advice would be to really think about what you want for your catering services, especially if it's within your control, and then really map how you're going to get there and get advice if you know, if you need it. So does that answer your question, Ruth? I think
yeah, that's great, thank you.
That's the biggest challenge. It's that expectation against reality and how they clash. Yeah, definitely.
Great. We had a question, which actually, Sonia, you might want to dip in on that as well, about this tension between the national school food standards, which essentially say that meat should be served 3 days a week. And then you normally have fish perhaps on a Friday, which only leaves you one meat-free day, when lots of places are trying to reduce their meat consumption and switch to a less and better. How would you advise that places can deliver both?
Yeah, it is. I think there's a recognition out there that the school food standards definitely aren't perfect, and I know that there's plans to sort of review them as part of the national food strategy. So hopefully we will get somewhere. In terms of Food for Life served here, we do ask that settings meet the school food standards across the school day, because they are the national guidelines. We talk a lot about using less but better meat, and really having meat-free dishes. So if there's 2 choices on the menu, having plant-forward dishes that settings really promote, so that they're cutting down on the amount of meat that they cook. On the 3 days a week where there is meat served in the school food standards, we would talk about using less but better meat. So really looking at the dishes where you can substitute some of that meat for another protein source. So whether that's as simple as you know, a meat bolognese sauce, where you do half and half with meat and lentils, and really looking at how to reduce the meat that's served when you've got to serve the meat 3 days a week. And we talk about as well not swapping the meat for more processed food, but really looking at cooking, you know, plant-based food from scratch. Yeah, so that would be our advice. And also looking at other opportunities. We don't have a lot of secondary schools that have Food for Life served here, and that's purely because a lot of secondary schools don't meet the school food standards, and they might meet it at lunchtime, but it's all the food sort of around the school day, whether you're talking about breakfast or breaks, and they find it really hard to meet the school food standards. But we have some really good examples of those that do, where they've really looked at the food that's served, and you know, they're not serving bacon and sausage every day, or they're really doing some creative things. So yeah, I think it's that modelling as well, and having really good examples.
If I was just going to come into here, I think it's quite interesting because I think the climate element has really, the conversation has really moved on rather quickly, thankfully, of late. And I think food school standards haven't caught up. So there is definitely this tension. And I know we struggle here in that about saying less meat. And because people feel that maybe they're taking something away from people. So I think there needs to be a real discussion around the language and how we can frame this better, that people aren't losing out, that they're actually gaining more from, having, better food that's better for the planet, that's better for them. So I think that there's some work around gauging that, but we just need to, the two conversations need to catch up and come together and be really progressive and dynamic.
I would definitely agree. We had an example, I won't say which local authority it was, but really cut down on the meat that we're using, very rural local authority. And a lot of the parents were really upset about the fact that, their child wasn't going to be getting meat every day. And just the marketing around, look, we've done this, but we're actually buying better meat and we're getting it from a farm that's just down the road. And actually, this is what we're doing. If we carried on like we were doing, we can't afford this meat. And the promotion that they did around it was really great. So I think it is how you sell it as well. It's how you promote it.
Yeah, those are great answers. I think it's super. Thank you very much. I just had one more, quite a specific one, Karen. So let's not try and get into it, but it was just about how, when you review the standards. So somebody wanted to know whether do you have a process for reviewing the standards and when that next review might be?
We do have a process for reviewing the standards. It's quite a lengthy process, which is something that we're looking at the moment. We're not as flexible as sometimes we'd like to be. I think there's a bit of a we'd like to just click our fingers and just change standards. But we've been around now for 12 years and the standards have been quite quite firm throughout, and we want to stick to that. We want to stick to our principles, but we definitely are looking at reviewing all of the standards over the next 12 months to see whether or not they're still relevant. You talk about, Sonia mentioned carbon and climate change, and we just want to sort of look to make sure, assess to make sure that we're meeting needs currently. So we will be doing that, but there is quite a process to it. We started that process with a sort of review I've served here, where we've been going out externally to our licensees and asking them what the standards mean to them, and we've got some really good feedback from them, and it turns out that a lot of our standards are still really relevant. In fact, the one that's valued most, I think, has come back that it's around the fresher prepared, especially when we're moving into sort of a more less meat, more plant-based. The fresher prepared, I think, sets people apart from what they actually use, because processed food is processed food, whether it's meat-based or plant-based. So that's a really valuable one. But there is quite a process, and we do usually have an external consultation. So if anybody is interested, look out for that. Yeah, but we will be going through a process of reviewing them. Yeah.
Yeah. Just one more then before we move on for you, Karen. There's a really good question just come in from Fiona from Good Food Oxfordshire. All of our school catering is outsourced. Do you have any advice on particularly working with academies and schools adopting the Food for Life, or encouraging their catering providers to adopt Food for Life? Everyone always seems so busy with so many priorities, but it isn't at the top of their lists.
Yeah, so it is a difficult one, because now all schools can make their own decisions about what their catering provider does. And I think I'll come back to what I said earlier. They need to really think about what they want from their catering service and ask for that within the contract tendering. And when my advice would be, if you ask for something, don't just assume that you're going to get it. So you need some contract monitoring as well. What we're actually finding with academy groups is that at one point all academies, when they went under, when they all came together, all had different different models for school meals. So you might have had some in-house, some with external, some with internal caterers. It was all a mishmash. What we're finding now is a lot of the larger academy groups are actually bringing all their catering under one sort of brand now, and they're seeing that as sort of a USP for their academy and a strength. And we're getting much more interaction from academies who are now ready to sort of move on to that next stage of bringing all their schools under the same processes for food. So yeah, I think it's just that message of really ask for what you want and make sure that you get it.
Yeah.
Can I just come in with just one thing there? But is this an opportunity then, if you're looking at a food strategy for your city, to look at, even though you may have outsourced all of your catering, but as a city to say, this is what we would like to see served in our schools, and then, you know, engage the schools in that process as well.
Absolutely.
That's a great idea, and we've seen some of the work in London and in Lambeth, where they had outsourced their school catering service, but they were still able to bring the schools together to decide on standards and decided what they wanted to be served. So you can still, the local authority and local partners can still play a role influencing, even if you don't control. I think that's a good point to make. And also it's about national standards, and I'll come on to that later. So yeah. Okay, thank you everybody. Great, more questions are coming in, and we'll save those till the end of the session, so thanks for that. But without further ado, it's my turn to take the floor now to talk a little bit more about the about what's going on with the Food for the Planet campaign and some stuff about national standards. So just give us a sec to share screen. Okay, hopefully you can all see my first slide. Can you just give us a thumbs up if you can, Leon? Great, thank you. Oh no. Nightmare, I've gone back to the beginning. Sorry, just give us a second. Okay, so about my work predominantly is on the climate and nature emergency and food. And this time last year, we did a quick and dirty assessment of all of the local authorities in the UK that have declared a climate and nature emergency, and that's about 3/4. And how many of the published action plans include food in a meaningful way. And we found that only about a third mention food in any way that's meaningful, and most of those just talk about the about food waste collection, and only 13 include food in a way that we would consider to be adequate. So as a result of this, the Sustainable Food Places and Sustain have got together to devise a new campaign, which we're calling Food for the Planet. And our aim through this campaign is to help local authorities to tackle the climate and nature crisis through food in some specific ways. The first is by helping councils realise their power. So helping to understand where they can have influence and power through food and the impact that that has on greenhouse gas emissions and the nature emergency. We want to increase the climate-friendly food on offer locally, and we really want to celebrate success and help places to learn from each other. And this campaign is being led by local food partnerships and councils, and often both. So it will come as no surprise, given the theme of this webinar, that procurement is one of the biggest areas that a council can have an influence over the climate impact of the food in their area. And we have developed the Every Mouthful Counts toolkit, which is an incredibly simple toolkit. What it is just a list of actions that councils can take on food and climate change in their area. And they identify where big emissions reductions can be made through food, and it allows you to browse resources and case studies and understand a bit more with literature. It's broken down into various themes, and of course, one theme being procurement and sustainable diets. What we really wanted to do here is set things out, set the actions and the power that a council can have out in a clear and easily accessible way, we've become very aware that often the people working on climate change within councils are specialists in transport and energy and not necessarily in food. So we wanted to communicate the power of food in a way that's very clear and easy to understand. And as you can see from this on the right, we did some quick and dirty calculations about where an average council's main emissions come from the food system. And you can see there, procurement and sustainable diets and food waste are two really of the two key areas where emissions are the biggest. Obviously, you know, there's some about land use and farming and planning, but really it's procurement that is the biggest chunk of the food emissions. And when we actually look at food use and food waste, a chunk of those emissions come within procurement as well. So all in all, this is the biggest area where a council can make a difference to the climate and nature emergency. So as I said, the toolkit is there, it's giving the list of actions, but what we really want councils to do is to register on the toolkit, and that gives you a lot of extra bonus access. The first is that it allows you to tick off the actions that have been completed, and therefore you can see your progress over time and publicly mark what you're doing to make a difference locally. For some of the actions, you can calculate emission savings. So you can actually find out, you know, if you change procurement, it allows you to plug in the number of meals that you'll act on and give you a carbon emission saving estimate. It also allows you to chart some of the likely co-benefits, which really helps to embed food into many of the other council procurement strategies like health and well-being, jobs, and nature recovery. This registering on the toolkit can be done by the council itself, or it can be done by a local partnership on behalf of the council. And then you can start to mark the actions that are being taken by your local council. Ideally, that would be in partnership with the council, because the more that we can do these things together, the better. So the second part of the Food for the Planet campaign, in addition to the toolkit, is the Planet Pledge. And what we're asking places to do anywhere that sells food is to take a simple pledge which commits you to reducing the climate impact of the food served locally. We want anybody to take the pledge: restaurants, caterers, universities, anybody who serves food. But we'd really, really like to see councils be the first people to take the pledge in their area, because that's really setting themselves as a leader and showing what's possible to businesses in the area. The pledge is quite simple. It requires two mandatory commitments. One is to reduce the amount of meat served overall and to serve better meat. And then a number of other commitments around healthy food and more ethically sourced produce, which you can choose from a number of different options. And if you're already doing Food for Life, that is all the voluntary commitments ticked off. All you need to do is the less and better commitment, because we want it to fit in with Food for Life served here accreditation, of course. So please join us. As you can see, we've got quite a few places signed up already. Great to see Leeds on there, of course, and we've got a great showing in the Midlands. I've got to say, the sort of Midlands is doing really well. So come on, Northwest, and come on, Scotland. We could really do some large geographical areas, because then we can turn big areas blue. Thank you very much, Tower Hamlets, but such a small place. But yeah, thank you for everybody who signed up already. We launched in September, and already we've seen lots of places sign up. So thanks very much. We're starting to create a movement on this, and it's really positive to see. So to move on now to the national policy context for procurement. I said at the beginning that it was a really exciting time to be working in procurement, and I will say that that's because finally it feels like we're starting to get a bit of traction at a national level. A few months ago, we launched a survey, and it's actually still open, to ask local places what you're doing already on procurement and what you would like to see the government do more to take leadership at a national level. One thing that we found from that survey already is that lots of places are trying to do really good things, but there are a few things that are really standing in their way. And one of them is lack of access to easy to use, low meat options, climate-friendly options, and those products that just automatically meet the Food for Life served here criteria or the government buying standards. And that's because, you know, at the moment, it's sort of pockets of good practice and not good practice across the board, because we've seen from the school nutritional standards that when standards are mandatory across the board, the supply chain will adapt and good products just become the norm in the supply chain. So that for me is a very strong signal about why we need better standards nationally. We have, so I'm sure you're aware that the National Food Strategy was released in July, and it had recommendations in it for procurement, and it said that the school food, the government buying standards should be overhauled and brought in line with a climate-friendly diet. And they also recommended some other stuff around better monitoring and enforcement, and higher standards overall. So we're really hoping that we can try and achieve some of that in the white paper, which will be released, as far as we know, in the end of January. What we're calling for is higher standards overall. So British standards as a minimum for meat and dairy, and a proportion to be from higher welfare and free range. We really want contracts to be accessible to smaller producers. So we want DEFRA and the government to lead on that. And we want overall the food to be healthier and reflect a climate-friendly diet. Obviously, as I said, this would deliver those economies of scale in the supply chain, but it would also mean the large caterers that supply to things like academies and those places which are difficult to reach would just automatically come under national standards, and it would make all our lives easier for pushing for the best. So we've just launched a campaign yesterday called Back British Farmers, which is leading with the ask to try to get more food served in the public sector to be from British sources and to support high welfare and high quality British farmers. So we'd really, really like you to write to your MP. I'm going to drop a link in the chat. We've already had one MP writing to George Eustace to back our action and demand better. Absolutely brilliant. We just really need as many as possible in the run up to January, which is when the white paper will be released. The other thing I just wanted to mention was that the Eating Better Alliance have just launched a really good new guide called Serving Better, which is a film and a little toolkit, which is really a starting from basics about more climate friendly meals in schools, in public sector and across public sector catering. It's a brilliant, lots of Q&A, some really good case studies, including Leeds, of course, and some great tips and ideas for meal swaps and recipe ideas, which is a great first place to start. So thank you very much. Without further ado, I'll close there and stop screen sharing. So just give me a second. And I will pass on to our next speaker, who I'm delighted to say is Sonia Woodcock from Foodwise Leeds, who's the chair of Leeds Food Partnership and has been doing some amazing work on healthy and sustainable food in Leeds schools. Thank you, Sonia.
Great, thank you for the introduction, and I'll just share my screen now. Super, can everybody see that all right? I'd like to talk a little bit about Leeds and the commitment to sustainable procurement that we've gone through here. But first of all, I'd just like to say that I'm actually the coordinator of Foodwise and not the chair, which is kind of right. We like to keep those roles separated. It helps keep everything in line. So I'm here to talk about Leeds and its commitment to sustainable procurement. And this is particularly coming from a climate emergency perspective. So in 2019, Leeds declared a climate emergency and committed to being carbon neutral by 2030. They organized for a citizens' jury to take place, who then set out 10 recommendations. But in the top 10 recommendations, they did not include food. It was much more focused on transport and housing. The Leeds Climate Commission then produced the Leeds Carbon Roadmap that will take Leeds to carbon neutrality by 2030, but it was based on the citizens' jury's recommendations. So food doesn't take a central role in this. It's sort of included at the end within consumption. So not really standing out in its own right. In October 2020, Leeds City Council signed the Glasgow Food and Climate Declaration and was one of the early adopters. I pushed them to do this because I recognized that they weren't taking a real stance around food and climate, and this seemed like a really good opportunity and would provide the support and structure to help them achieve this. So I was really pleased when they agreed and signed that. But like with many things, it kind of sat there for a while. So last summer, when Sustainable Food Places put forth to do the climate, the day of action, this is when I went back to them again. But what I just want to say that just this month during COP26, the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission published their action plan, and it does include food. So I will come back to that at the end of my presentation. So as I said, so we held this low carbon lunch on September 29th. It was really great because a lot had happened since the signing of the declaration in the autumn. Because to start with, we have a food champion within the council, Councillor Marshall Katang. And so she was really supportive of doing a low carbon lunch, taking a stance and making some real commitments. So we held it in Kirkgate Market. If you've seen the SFP film, you'll see us in there as well. And we also, so it was a real advantage, opportunity to come out to the community, get people engaged, share food, and talk about the commitments that were being made. And we also encouraged to have low carbon lunches in the community as well. So some third sector organizations got on board, which was really great. So it's not just so top down, there's a lot of bottom up happening as well. So on the day, Leeds City Council made 3 commitments, and they're the first council in Britain to have done so. So it's really, really taking a stance there. And they're committed to buying local and serving local across all the food served, all the food procured by council. So that's schools, that's Meals on Wheels, and that's also across all, parks and countryside and the restaurants and meal services that they provide. So buy local and serve local, to ban air freighted imports, and to also have the carbon footprint of meals served. And to help with this, the carbon footprint of the meals, they're working with Leeds City Council to develop an app, which the school caterers can then calculate the meals that they've put, the food that they're making, and if they want to reduce the carbon, they can just put something else in. So this is really great. So this is underway at the moment. So we look forward to this app being used and then being used more widely across Leeds and perhaps wider. So it's great to have a tool that will be available. But this doesn't, they didn't make these commitments out of nowhere. This is a process of work that's been going on for a long time. And so in 2020, Catering Leeds, which supplies 180 primary schools across Leeds, committed to 2 meat-free days a week and increasing extra vegetable content across all of the schools that they work with. So, and that had taken a lot of time before then, to obviously to change the menus, to work with the schools, to work with all the staff as well. But it was really the direction of travel that they were going. So we see these commitments as really good. It's really starting to shift how and what food is produced in Leeds and Yorkshire, because if the schools are demanding different food, we've got to produce different food. Opportunity to create a stronger local economy with more routes to market for local producers. There's also the potential to change land use policies as well, looking at what the land that we've got within the right in the center urban areas, or also in the peri-urban areas, and how that can be used to produce food. And also increasing opportunities for jobs and skills development as well. If we've got a a thriving market, local food market and food production, there's a lot of career opportunities, which is really beneficial and something that councils like. So I just want to say, like, by Leeds City Council, by putting its fork in the ground and making these commitments, so they're putting these pledges into policy, which then we can hold them to accountability, and we will. It's also, the council is also developing a procurement working group with anchor institutions. And it's really taken a step forward. There's been a lot of anchor work going on within the city, but it took Leeds making these commitments to really put food on the table in these discussions. So that's really just sort of developing and is exciting. We really hope as well that it encourages neighbouring local authorities to follow suit, so that we don't just look at Leeds, we can look at West Yorkshire and actually Yorkshire as a whole. And hopefully this will come into, say, York's Fix Our Food work that's going on. It's the beginning of ongoing commitments across the food system. That's how we like to say it. We don't want it just to end here with around procurement of food into school meals. But we would like to see a commitment to less and better quality meat, and really, taking that on board. The last thing I wanted to say was that just this month that the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission produced their food action plan. And I think what was particularly relevant to this conversation, if you look at their framework for change, they've put climate and nature at the heart of decision making. And then there's a specific point here about inclusion of climate change as a key consideration in purchasing and procurement. As £1 of every 3 that is spent in the UK goes through the public sector, adopting a climate as a priority in all publicly funded activities could have a significant impact. So within that would include food. So it's really great to see that worded so specifically. And then within the 50 actions that they've outlined, there was 2 specific to do with food. So that's prepare the food and farming sector for current and future changes, and also to support net zero agriculture and food production. So this is really good to see, and we hope that it's the beginning, the turning of the tide, and seeing that value in changing the food system and the benefits to procurement for this. Super, thank you.
Thank you so much, and well done again for everything. It's just great to see. We really needed, a champion, and it's fantastic, and especially to hear about how that's working its way out into neighbouring places. And it really feels like the movement for change is coming as much from the ground as from us kind of lobbying at a national level, and it's so helpful for both. So great. Okay. Next up, it's time to move to Q&A, and I can hardly keep on top of the questions. There's so many good ones, but I wanted to open with one that you touched on earlier, Sonia, which is the language around less and better meat. We normally use better meat and more veg, as a real effort to try to stop making it feel like you're taking something away by serving less and better meat. But I'd be really interested if you've got any tips or ideas, Karen and Sonia, about how to do that and how you have managed to get people on board and communicate that message. Thanks.
Well, we haven't in Leeds yet. It's a bit of a sticking point. I've been told to, because it's a bit political. And so I think, even what you just said there, just like reframing it. So, better meat, more vegetables. If you look as well, it's about, they have 2 meat-free days in the schools and more vegetable content. So I think it's definitely about more. Let's give more, let's give better, and let's give it from Leeds, let's give it from Yorkshire, or Britain, as much as we can. So I just think it's really key, but we also need, other partners to be using the same language as well, and just moving that forward. So a bit of a movement around it.
Yeah, I could completely agree. It's great. Thank you. Anything, Karen, would you like to add anything there?
I think Sonia's covered it. I think it's that messaging, around the reasons for it. It's not that you're taking something away. You just sort of enhancing, and all the reasons around animal welfare and buying British and local produce, and really promoting that. I just think that's the key to it.
Yeah, great, thank you. Becca's just come in with a really good question about the national standards and all the nations of the UK. It's a really good question. These only apply to England because Wales and Scotland have got their own plans in track for a food bill or for similar good food strategies, which have already pointed to them having national food strategies for good national strategies, good national standards for procurement. So in a way, England is behind those two. So that's the one that really needs to catch up. So it's in train across the nations. It's just that like England's the one we really need to hammer in the next sort of 6 weeks, 8 weeks. So thanks for that. Just a question for the SFP team, perhaps one for you, Leon. Would it be better for the food partnerships to promote sort of national standards rather than their own local healthy food awards? They're looking to start their own, and is it better to promote a nationally recognised award? Thanks, Leon.
Hi. So I don't know who asked that question, but yes, we do. So our awards cover the whole food system. And just procurement is a part of that. So we're looking at health and climate and so on. Within those award standards is recommendations as a framework, and within that framework we recommend certain national schemes such as Food for Life served here that are already meet our standards or go beyond them. So that's how we do it. So ours is a framework to approach a whole food system approach in your local area, but then we recommend existing standards that already are recognised and meet the standards that we put forward. So it could be Food for Life served here, it could be fair trade, it could be other things. So they're within it. So they're not an alternative. They're more an umbrella for a whole bunch of stuff across the food system.
Great, thank you for that. The next question is, do we have any guides to help local authorities write a local sustainable food policy, or examples of local authorities which have one? I'm going to say yes. Do you want to just take that and drop some examples in? Because there's loads, aren't there, Leon?
There's loads. So we have a toolkit, which is all about having setting up, running and managing a local food partnership that is cross-sector and whole food system approach. Within that, there is some guide, this is on our website, there is some guides about developing a strategy, particularly around the consultation and so on. There's loads of places developing food strategies at the moment, and some of them are doing an amazing job or have developed it. Cardiff, I'm going to miss people out now, so they're going to get a bit whatever, but Cardiff, Glasgow, it's all starting up in Leeds. Luton and Tameside are just reviving there, so that's a different and interesting process. So I don't know who asked that question, but we have an email forum that you can use to connect with places that are doing that, or you can contact any of us directly, have a look at maybe some case studies on our website. But yes, the answer is yes to both those questions.
Cool. And of course you can contact the SFP team for any specific questions, as well as, Karen's already said, volunteering to support with that. There was a question that came in about the Food for the Planet pledge and the Glasgow Declaration, which I thought was a very good one. Thank you for that. The Glasgow Declaration, as you probably know, has been signed by about 100 governments, local and regional, in the run-up to COP26. And what it does is it commits places to an overall strategy for food and climate change. It's quite broad, it's quite top level. What the Food for the Planet pledge is trying to do is to turn those declarations into action. So it's quite specific and it's quite action orientated and it's quite measurable. So we really see the pledges and the toolkit as both being the next steps for the Glasgow Declaration, because one is about the action that you take to meet the pledge, and the Food for the Planet pledge is about getting people to move that very big commitment into something specific around procurement. So I hope that answers. It's all a bit confusing, but I hope that answers that question. Thank you. I've got an I've just lost the one about long contracts. Rachel, thank you. So yes, this question about very long contracts of 25 years or more. How can we influence better procurement if organisations are locked into very long contracts? Karen, is that one that you feel that you can answer?
Yeah, we do see this quite a lot, especially with the PFI initiatives that are still running, where contracts are locked in for long periods of time. It is quite difficult, and what sometimes happens with those is that the contracts get subcontracted to other providers, so you do have an opportunity then to really work with them to sort of outline what you want and the changes you make. To all contracts, there are tweaks that can be made if you're having the right conversations. The problem is that if a contract's been set, that's usually it usually costs more to make any changes to that. But there are sort of things that you can do. Yeah, it is difficult though, but there might be an extra cost to putting something else into a contract, but it's definitely worth exploring. But I think some of the really long ones do get sort of sublet, if you will, which is the ideal opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, it is difficult, but it definitely is possible to change the food within a contract.
Yeah.
If you think those companies want to keep the contracts after they've expired, and they need to be thinking now about how they keep their relationships sweet, and public sector contracts are big and expensive, and if they need a nudge, they should be held, their feet should be held to the fire for being, you know, for retaining that contract in the next tranche, and that's often the best way in. But most, you know, have been found to be relatively amenable. Sometimes it's just an excuse, I think. Okay, thanks for that question. Now, I've noticed that there's been quite a few questions coming in about buying local and local supply and this idea of sort of dynamic procurement and so on. And there was a really good question from James about non-profit for procurement and about actually trying to buy outside the model of capitalism that has caused the climate crisis in the first place, right? So what I was going to suggest is that perhaps that is something that could be a topic for a future webinar, because dynamic procurement and other stuff has been really popular. So Leon, would you want to say anything about that, or perhaps in the chat, let us know if that's something that you would be interested in and what you would like to see in a future webinar on that, perhaps?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's really interesting, isn't it? Because there are examples of it, particularly around food co-ops and box schemes that have then gone on to supply into institutions and various networks that operate at that level. So yeah, I mean, it's a good question generally, is if this is the first of a number of events that we want to do and resources around procurement. So yeah, let's have ideas, but that would be a really good one to pick up.
But isn't there a webinar like next week around dynamic procurement?
Not with us. There probably is one, yes.
Oh. If there is, then, you know, we'd certainly like to share it. Yeah, no rivalry.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, and there's different things happening in the Three Nations as well. So yeah, I mean, dynamic procurement as well. Does that fit the non-profit picture, Ruth?
Well, you can definitely specify in and through community wealth building, you can specify small and medium enterprises or enterprises that are owned through models that keep wealth within communities, like worker cooperatives and so on. So it's all possible. Yeah. Right. Somebody's had a question about health. Does anybody know of any figures for the health impacts that have been realised through changing food procurement, or anybody know of any research that's being done in that respect? Karen?
One for Karen?
Not off the top of my head, no. I could maybe do a little bit of research into it, but yeah.
Yeah, it could perhaps be a call out to the attendees as well. If you know of any, drop any in the chat. this is a, yeah.
I mean,
on the radio.
I think a lot of it is by proxy rather than direct metrics. So it might be less of this, more of that, has a positive or negative impact on health, which or, you know, schemes like Food for Life Served Here, they have the numbers of what change there is in the food system because of those standards. But then that's then for someone like public health to translate that into health impacts, I think.
Thank you. I've actually got a few links that have just been put from Food Foundation, a report, another one which I'll, in the Q&A, which I'll drop in the chat. So the next question is one that you might be able to help with, Sonia, is about engaging students with the standard and engaging students with better food generally. And I know that Leeds were involved in work with children, with school children. Is there anything that you wanted to share about how you managed to help make that land with students and parents? Or Karen as well, sorry.
Well, to be honest, I don't know much about the details of the work that went in with the schools, but I do know that there's a smaller university in Leeds where the student union are looking at, they want the foods provided in the university changed, and they want to see no or considerably less meat. So that's something I'm looking to engage with them. I think it's very early days at the moment, but that's quite exciting. But it's also interesting because this university, the catering, it's a large, like, national catering company that's providing the food there, rather than the other universities which are, you know, sort of have in-house caterers. So yeah, watch this space. But it's nice to see it coming from the ground up, and I think that will create, it'll be easier to change because it's coming from the students.
Yeah, and in terms of engaging younger children, I think it's all about modelling that behaviour within the setting and looking at food across the whole setting rather than just the school meals. So really engaging pupils in making decisions about food in a structured way and involving sort of community and really having a whole sort of setting approach to food, I think is really important. And at secondary school, there's a sort of bite back program that's going on around food, but again, giving them a voice and letting students lead work on healthy and sustainable food and really linking it to their curriculum, I think is key. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And of course, the Food for Life Schools programme has been doing that for, and Eco Schools as well, both really good programmes with lots of resources about that. So I'd urge you to check those out. They're brilliant. I don't know how much Eco Schools has got about procurement in it, but it's a good place to start, I think. But I had a question that I wanted to ask the two of you, which is often the excuse used that perhaps it's all going to be a lot more expensive and it's not possible to do within public sector budgets. Is there anything, do you have any evidence of improvements being achieved within the budgets, or even saving money, or a response to that question?
Yeah, I think there's a real misconception about budgets, and it's all about menu planning. I think it's really hard to look at a menu that's already there and think, right, well, if we swap this and we swap that, then it will be more, you will incur costs, and it's like we said with the contracts and everything. But if you actually plan your menu and really look at swaps that you can make and plan it carefully so that you're using less meat. I know it's one that gets rolled out a lot, but less meat usually means less cost. And, you know, even buying higher welfare meat and using less of it can impact on costs in a positive way. We're just doing some work with a couple of large hospital trusts who are moving from not having Food for Life Served Here to having Food for Life Served Here, and really developing menus around that. I think that'd be really interesting when that comes out, but early indications look really positive. So I do think it's all about the planning. And also we always talk about skills in the kitchen as well, and not using as much processed food, and really utilising skills in using using seasonal vegetables, working with your suppliers to see what's coming up, and really thinking about that in terms of menu planning. I think all work to sort of mitigate cost impact. Yeah.
The other thing I will add is I do know that when Catering Leads was going through this process with across the primary schools, the menu planning went on for a really, really long time beforehand. Like it was, it seemed like forever from my perspective that it was coming out, but they were just getting all the ducks in a row, and they wouldn't be taking on extra costs. They can't afford to take on any extra costs. So I can imagine it was cost saving, and it's been successful, like in rolling it out, because they've taken that time, they've put the work in beforehand, that it's a smoother transition and people know what's coming and get on board with it. And there's also been a lot of training of the cooks as well, and bringing them up to speed. So yeah, they know what they're serving as well. Really key.
Yeah, I would back that, Sonia. I know the work that Leeds have done in developing their sort of school cooks has been absolutely fantastic. Absolutely the right way to do it. Looking at what skills you've got and how you can develop them, and then planning a menu that looks at, better food, but without any cost impact is definitely the way to go. There's lots of resources out there around that. Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's just not an overnight thing. Like it takes time.
Yeah, thank you. There was just a quick question here from Alex, which was whether anybody has a tool that can help measure the carbon footprint of ingredients. I wish, Alex. This is like the golden thing that is incredibly complicated, but some tools do exist. There's a really good study by Poor and Nemechek, but loads of good data, and I'll link it, but it's mostly international. So it's a bit difficult to apply to the UK context, or you have to do it with a pinch of salt. In my toolkit, I looked at some really good studies from Oxford University about the reduction that you get if you reduce meat by 25% and switch to nearly all British fruit and veg. And I made an estimation based on some really solid data that we've got about that. In terms of individual ingredients, it's a lot more difficult. The only thing I would say is it might not be that desirable to go down to the nitty gritty of actual carbon numbers, but to try to just think more holistically about good food for the climate and nature emergency and health and well-being, and try to not to get too worried about the numbers, because unfortunately, some carbon calculators will put things like industrially produced chicken as looking really good for the carbon footprint, but actually it's high for antibiotics, terrible for animal welfare, and also causes localized pollution. So there is no perfect tool, I would say. And I think it's something that academics scratch their head around about a lot, but I'll add what I can in the chat for you. Okay.
Can I just add one thing there? But in Leeds, we're actually working on this right now for the schools. So I don't know the details of it. I don't know, but obviously they'll be focusing on food that they're serving there. And then, how this can then be shared wider, will be really interesting. But yeah.
Yeah.
Great. So we might have the perfect roundup of this perfect solution to our problems. Sorry, Karen, I cut you off there.
I was just going to add that we're just working on a programme at the moment with some French partners from the University of Brest, but looking at, it's called Cool Food Pro, and it's looking at a carbon calculator. We're just working with some pilot sites. So if anybody's interested in sort of hearing about that, it will be rolled out wider in the new year. But if anybody's interested in it, then just give me a shout. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Karen. Well, we've just got a minute to wrap up. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Leon, did you just want to pitch in with anything about what's coming up on the agenda for the Sustainable Food Places webinars, or anything else about the network?
So we're just developing the programme for next year in terms of webinars and events and resources. As far as procurement goes, we really do want to hear what you'd like to hear about, whether it's setting specific, you know, do you want to hear about how to lobby and create change in, say, hospitals or schools or whatever you've got in your area, universities, prison network, or whatever it is. So if that's of interest, yes, we can do that. If it's something more broad, yes, we can do that. If it's just a follow-up to this kind of more general meeting, yeah, we can do that. So we're going to be led by you on that. So yeah, that's what we've got planned. If you have got those suggestions, we're going to make those plans before the end of the year. So if, you know, we can be flexible, but if you've got ideas of something specific, get them to us by whatever means. You can email us directly or put something in the chat now, because I can review it later.
Great, thank you. And we'll follow up from this session, so you'll have an email to reply to. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Without further ado, thank you so much for joining us today on the webinar. Thank you to Leon and Karen and Sonia for being our speakers today. Hope I've done an okay job in Ren's absence. And I look forward to seeing you again at future events. So look out on our social medias and on the Sustainable Food Places website for future webinars and other events like this. But thank you so much for joining. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Cut off exit. Thank you so much.